Across the swamps, farmlands, and river bottoms of the American South, something has been quietly changing. Trail cameras that once logged dozens of wild boar movements every single night have gone still. Fields that were torn apart like a plow had run through them at 3 a.m. are healing over. No new poison program was approved, no massive new hunting initiative was announced, no single agency claimed credit. And yet, in county after county, the numbers are shifting in a way that 6 decades of trapping, shooting, and aerial gunning never managed to achieve on their own. The explanation is not a mystery predator or a secret government project. It is something stranger and more complicated. Nature, slowly and unevenly, doing what it has always done, largely without anyone directing it. To understand why this matters, you have to understand how completely wild boars were never supposed to become a permanent part of the American landscape in the first place. Pigs are not native to North America in any form. They arrived with European explorers, most famously with Hernando de Soto, who brought domestic swine along his expedition routes through the American Southeast in the 1500s as a mobile, self-replenishing food source. Some escaped. Some were deliberately released. Over the following centuries, free-range farming practices, in which pigs were allowed to roam and forage largely unsupervised, only accelerated the spread. By the time anyone thought to treat feral swine as a distinct ecological problem rather than a rural nuisance, the animals had already established populations across multiple states, breeding freely with no meaningful predator pressure to keep them in check. The biological reality of feral hogs is what turned a manageable nuisance into a national crisis. A single breeding female, commonly called a sow, can produce 2 litters per year under favorable conditions, with each litter averaging 4 to 8 piglets. Those piglets can reach sexual maturity in as little as 5 to 6 months, meaning a population can theoretically compound at a pace few other large mammals on the continent can match. Add a diet that includes almost anything, from acorns and root vegetables to field crops, bird eggs, and carrion, and you have an animal perfectly built to exploit nearly every environment in the eastern and southern United States. There was, for most of the 20th century, almost nothing standing in their way. The numbers that resulted are staggering by any standard. Current USDA and animal and plant. Health Inspection Service data placed the feral swine population in the United States at approximately 6 million animals, spread across at least 35 states, with the heaviest concentrations in Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, California, Georgia, and Louisiana. Texas alone is believed to host more than 2 million feral hogs, spread through nearly every county in the state. The economic toll is equally dramatic. Estimates of nationwide agricultural damage caused by feral swine range from roughly $1.5 billion to more than $2 billion annually, covering everything from destroyed crops and damaged levees to contaminated water sources and torn-up pasture land. Farmers across the South have described walking into fields at dawn to find rows of corn or sorghum reduced to churned mud overnight, an entire season's investment gone in a single evening of rooting and wallowing. For decades, the response to this crisis was built almost entirely around direct removal. State and federal agencies expanded trapping programs, encouraged year-round hunting in states where it was legal, and invested heavily in aerial gunning operations using helicopters, and more recently, thermal drone technology to track sounders, the family groups in which feral hogs typically live and move at night. The USDA's National Feral Swine Damage Management Program, established in 2014, has coordinated much of this effort, working with state wildlife agencies to reduce feral swine populations and, where feasible, eliminate them entirely from certain regions. That program has had real, measurable success. As of recent reporting, 18 states have reduced their feral swine invasion level, meaning the size and density of their populations, since the program began, with some states like Indiana moving from a serious, established population toward complete local elimination. But even the architects of that program have been candid about its limits in the states where the problem is worst. Wildlife researchers have long known that to simply prevent a local feral hog population from growing, managers typically need to remove somewhere between 50 and 75% of that population every single year. Not once, but continuously, year after year, without interruption. In practice, most hunting and trapping programs never come close to that threshold. Hunters in Louisiana, for example, have historically removed less than half of what would be required to stop the population's growth. According to the state's own Wildlife and Fisheries Department, new animals migrate in from neighboring territory. Survivors that escape traps or evade hunters grow more cautious and harder to catch. In the states where feral hogs are most deeply entrenched, meaning Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, and California, official USDA classifications place eradication as effectively out of reach, given current tools and funding. The strategy in those places has shifted from elimination to damage reduction, a tacit acknowledgement that human effort alone was never going to solve this problem at the scale it exists. This is where the story becomes genuinely interesting. Because while agencies were focused on trap design and helicopter flight hours, a slower, older set of forces was quietly re-entering the picture in parts of the country, largely as an unintended consequence of decades of separate conservation work aimed at entirely different goals. In the mid-1990s, gray wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park after being absent from the region for roughly 70 years. What followed became one of the most closely studied ecological events in modern conservation science, and it fundamentally reshaped how researchers think about the role predators play in an ecosystem. Elk in Yellowstone altered their grazing behavior, spending less time in exposed river bottoms and open valleys where wolves could more easily corner them. Vegetation along those same river corridors began to recover in places. Some researchers linked this shift to increased beaver activity and improved songbird habitat, describing a cascading effect that rippled outward from the simple presence of a returning predator. It is worth being honest about the limits of that story, because the science has grown more nuanced in the years since the original, more dramatic version of the Yellowstone narrative first captured public attention. More recent research has pushed back against the idea that wolf reintroduction alone produced a clean, dramatic restoration of the entire ecosystem. Some ecologists studying the same landscape have found that other factors, including changing climate conditions, shifting elk hunting policy outside the park, and natural variation in vegetation recovery, played significant roles alongside the wolves, and that crediting predators alone oversimplifies a much messier reality. The broader concept that emerged from this research, often called the landscape of fear, still holds real scientific weight. It describes how the mere possibility of predation can change prey behavior in ways that ripple through an ecosystem, independent of how many animals are actually killed. But applying that concept responsibly means resisting the temptation to treat it as a magic fix, rather than one genuine factor among several. That distinction matters enormously when the same logic gets applied to feral hogs, because the honest picture there is similarly complicated, made up of real, measurable effects that fall well short of a single clean solution. Start with wolves specifically, since they offer the clearest documented connection between a recovering predator and wild boar populations, though not in the United States first. In Europe, where gray wolves and wild boar have coexisted for far longer without the kind of near-total predator extermination that occurred in North America, the relationship is well studied and well established. A review examining 16 separate wolf population studies across 21 wilderness areas in Europe found that wild boar made up close to half of the average European wolf's diet, roughly 49% by some estimates, making boar the single largest prey component for many wolf populations on that continent. In Italy, wolves have expanded their range dramatically in recent decades, moving from near extinction to established populations that now reach the outskirts of Rome itself. Wildlife officials there have documented wild boar remains in wolf scat collected from nature reserves close to the city, and some conservation officials have suggested, cautiously, that returning wolf populations may eventually help moderate boar numbers that have become a serious urban nuisance, occasionally even wandering into residential neighborhoods. The American picture is less mature, but not without evidence. Gray wolves remain far more geographically limited in the United States than in much of Europe, concentrated primarily in parts of the northern Rockies, the western Great Lakes region, and small emerging populations elsewhere following decades of reintroduction and natural range expansion. Their range overlaps only partially with the regions where feral hog populations are most severe, meaning wolves cannot currently be credited with any broad, nationwide effect on hog numbers. Where their ranges do overlap, however, wolves are opportunistic predators capable of taking a wide range of prey sizes, and there is no biological reason to think American wolves would behave fundamentally differently toward wild boar than their European counterparts do, given the opportunity and sufficient boar density in their territory. Mountain lions offer a more directly documented American example, and the research here is genuinely solid rather than speculative. A multi-year study conducted in the Davis Mountains of West Texas, using GPS collar data from 16 individually tracked mountain lions and more than 200 confirmed kill sites, found that feral hogs made up approximately 15% of the mountain lion's overall diet in that region, ranking behind mule deer and white-tailed deer, but ahead of species like javelina and elk. Researchers involved in that study noted that mountain lions in a multi-prey environment do not rely on any single species, but they clearly do take hogs regularly when the opportunity arises, particularly targeting younger, smaller, and more vulnerable animals within a sounder, rather than risking injury from a full-grown tusked adult boar capable of seriously wounding even a large predator. It is important to be equally honest about what that research does not show, because overstating it would repeat the same mistake the Yellowstone narrative made in its earlier, more simplified form. Texas Parks and Wildlife's own assessment of feral hog ecology in the state states plainly that even where predators like mountain lions, black bears, and American alligators do take hogs, predation of this kind plays only a minor role in overall feral hog mortality across the state as a whole. In the United States, unlike much of Europe and Asia, humans remain by a wide margin the most significant cause of feral hog mortality through hunting, trapping, and organized removal programs. Coyotes, bobcats, and golden eagles may opportunistically take very young piglets when the chance arises, but this kind of incidental predation does not come close to functioning as a population-level control mechanism on its own, particularly across the vast, predator-scarce stretches of the Deep South where hog densities are highest. If predators alone cannot fully explain the shifts researchers have started to notice in certain regions, disease is the second major factor worth examining carefully. And here, the real research tells a more complicated story than popular framing often suggests. Pseudorabies, sometimes called Ojeski's disease despite having no relation to the actual rabies virus, is a herpes virus that is genuinely endemic in feral swine populations across large parts of the southern United States. It spreads through direct contact, including nose-to-nose contact, breeding, and the scavenging of infected carcasses, and it has been successfully eradicated from the commercial domestic pig industry in the United States through decades of vaccination and biosecurity protocols. In feral populations, roaming freely across thousands of square miles of swamp, forest, and farmland, no equivalent vaccination effort exists or could realistically be deployed. Surveillance testing conducted by state wildlife agencies, including in Louisiana, has confirmed pseudorabies antibodies in a meaningful percentage of tested feral hogs, alongside other endemic diseases like swine brucellosis and leptospirosis. Here is where the honest research diverges sharply from the more dramatic version of this story that sometimes circulates. Texas A&M's own feral hog research program states clearly that pseudorabies has limited effects on feral hogs themselves. The disease is far more dangerous to other species that come into contact with infected hogs or their remains, including hunting dogs, which have been documented dying from pseudorabies exposure after participating in wild hog hunts in states like Alabama and Arkansas, along with domestic livestock such as cattle and goats. Pseudorabies is not, based on current veterinary and wildlife research, a disease that is quietly collapsing feral hog populations across the South, the way some accounts have suggested. It circulates persistently within hog populations. It poses a genuine and serious risk to other animals that interact with hogs, and it represents an ongoing complication for wildlife management. But it does not appear to function as a major independent driver of feral hog population decline based on the verified research currently available. The disease that genuinely could reshape this entire situation, and the one wildlife agencies are watching with real and justified concern, is one that has not yet arrived in the continental United States at all. African swine fever is a highly contagious, currently untreatable viral disease that has devastated domestic and wild pig populations across large parts of Asia and Europe over the past decade, causing near-total mortality in some outbreak regions and triggering massive culls of both wild boar and commercial pig herds. It cannot infect humans and poses no direct food safety risk, but its impact on pig populations, wild and domestic alike, has been catastrophic wherever it has taken hold. As of the most recent monitoring reports, African swine fever has not been detected anywhere in the continental United States. It has, however, been confirmed in the Dominican Republic and Haiti, prompting the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service to establish a protection zone covering Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands beginning in September 2021, along with a federal order suspending the interstate movement of live swine and swine products from those territories. Since May 2022, APHIS has expanded surveillance specifically targeting feral swine in high-risk counties across 9 states, testing more than 3,600 samples with no detections of the virus as of the latest published updates, and has extended additional monitoring along the U.S.-Mexico border and the Florida Gulf Coast as precautionary measures. Risk modeling conducted with Customs and Border Protection data has identified California, Texas, Georgia, and Florida as the highest priority states for proactive prevention efforts, largely due to the overlap between dense feral swine populations and points of potential introduction through international trade or travel. If African swine fever were ever to establish itself in the American feral hog population, the consequences would be immediate and severe, both ecologically and economically. Economic modeling published in recent veterinary and agricultural economics research has projected significant nationwide impacts on the American pork industry, an industry worth tens of billions of dollars annually, extending through domestic markets and international trade relationships. Wildlife agencies are not hoping for this outcome in any sense. They are conducting careful risk assessments and prevention planning, specifically to ensure it never happens. aware that an uncontrolled outbreak in feral populations would be effectively impossible to contain or reverse using any tool currently available. Taken together, the honest, verified picture of what is quietly working against feral hog populations in parts of the United States is not a single dramatic hunter finally evening the score. It is a slow, uneven, and incomplete convergence of several real but limited factors. Recovering wolf populations are documented extensively as significant predators of wild boar in Europe, and are likely capable of similar behavior in the parts of the United States where their range happens to overlap with hog territory, though that overlap currently remains limited. Mountain lions in specific regions like West Texas have been directly documented preying on feral hogs at a meaningful rate, roughly 15% of their diet in one well-studied population, even as official state assessments caution that this predation remains a minor contributor to overall hog mortality nationwide. Pseudorabies circulates persistently through feral hog populations and poses genuine risk to other species without functioning, based on current research, as a major independent driver of hog population decline on its own. And African swine fever remains the single largest looming threat, a disease with a demonstrated power to devastate pig populations wherever it has appeared, currently being kept out of the continental United States through active, ongoing surveillance rather than having already arrived. None of this diminishes how remarkable it is that these separate, quietly operating forces exist at all, each recovering or persisting largely independent of any coordinated plan, each capable of exerting real pressure on one of the most reproductively formidable invasive species in North America. What it does mean is that anyone looking for a single tidy explanation, a lone returning predator finally solving a problem that defeated decades of human effort, is looking for a story simpler than the one the actual research supports. The real story is messier, slower, and more honest. A landscape still dominated by human management effort, supplemented in certain places by predators cautiously reclaiming old territory, complicated by diseases that behave differently than popular accounts often suggest, and shadowed by the possibility of a pathogen that has not arrived yet but could change everything the moment it does. That is the version of this story that actually holds up against the available evidence, and it is, in its own way, more unsettling than a simpler narrative would be. It means there is no single hero quietly fixing this problem in the dark. It means the 6 million feral hogs currently spread across 35 states will likely remain a defining wildlife management challenge in the United States for years to come, shaped by an unpredictable mix of returning predators, circulating disease, human effort, and the ever-present risk of a pathogen still held, for now, just outside the country's borders. Whatever comes next will not be settled by a single dramatic development. It will be decided slowly, unevenly, county by county, in exactly the kind of quiet, incremental way that rarely makes headlines until one day someone finally notices the trail camera has gone still.